Welcome to Echo 371, Study Session 7, Public Debt. Introduction. This session intends to introduce you to the concept of public debt, also known as national debt. You will also explore the various forms and implications of public debt on the economy, learning outcomes. After you have studied this session, you should be able to 1. Explain public debt. 2. Describe the kinds of public debt. 3. Present rationale for raising public debt. 4. Point out sources of public debt. 5. Discuss the instrument of public debt. 6. Point out the effects of public debt on the economy. 7. Calculate debt service ratio. What is public debt? Debt is a contractual obligation of owing or accumulated borrowing with a promise to pay back at a future date. The effect of internal debt is not felt much in an economy because it involves taking of money from one section of the economy into the hands of another section in the economy. Public debt may be defined as the total sum of financial liabilities or obligations of the government, the result of a government's borrowing from its population, foreign government, or from international organizations such as the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, IBRD, is known as public debt. Public debt tends to be large-scale credit operations and are contracted on a national scale by federal government and on a lesser scale by state and local government. In Nigeria, public debt are also contracted by the state and local government primarily for public purposes. Kinds of public debt. Public debt also refers to obligations or liabilities. Forms of public debt, obligations or liabilities include the following. A. Short-term debt. These are obligations or liabilities that are of a maturity of less than a year at the time of issue and consist of items like treasury bills. B. Floating debt. These are debts which do not have any specific maturity but may be repayable subject to various terms and conditions. Examples are provident funds, small savings, reserve funds, and deposit. C. Permanent or funded debt. These are debts which have a maturity of more than 1 year at the time of issue. In practice, the maturity is usually between 3 and 30 years. Some of the loans may not be terminable, such that government pays the interest on such debt without ever repaying the principal. D. External loan. These are debts owed to foreigners. For example, foreign governments, institutions, firms, and individuals. These may have a variety of maturity and be subject to a variety of terms and conditions. E. Internal loan. These are debts that are sourced within the country. Reasons for raising public debt. 1. To finance deficit budget. Public debt is necessary at times to meet the financial requirements of the government. When government runs a deficit budget, the best alternative is to seek other sources, that is, to borrow in order to eliminate the deficit. 2. For sudden or unexpected contingencies in government expenditure. Government may be forced to incur a debt when there are wars or natural calamities in the country. 3. Governments raise public debt at times in order to use it as an effective tool in policy for achieving a variety of objectives such as economic growth and stabilization. 4. Governments use budget deficit as an important and an effective tool in accelerating the process of capital accumulation. This is done by borrowing and investing those funds in various projects which could yield interest or profit or dividend. Sources of public debt. Sources of public debt are classified as internal debt or external debt. Internal debt. Public debt may be internal or external. It is internal when the source of the debt is within the country. Nigeria's public debt within the economy are sources through the central bank, insurance companies, money and capital market. In the primary market, where new securities are issued, central bank guarantees the issue of this security and absorb any amount not subscribed by banks and non-bank public. The central bank also provides a secondary market for government securities, whereby those securities held by the banks are offered to the public for sale. Advantages of internal debt. Borrowing in the domestic economy through monetary and capital market have the following advantages. 1. It reduces foreign exchange leakages or outflows of investment fund by Nigerians. 2. It develops the financial market in a bid to mobilize domestic savings for public and private sector investment. External debt. Debt is said to be external if the creditors are foreigners. There is drainage of national resources in various forms in favor of foreign countries when the debt is serviced. The external source of finance for the federal government include bilateral and multilateral sources. Such sources are World Bank, International Monetary Fund, London Club Group of Creditors. This is made up of commercial banks from the industrialized countries of the world, such as Japan, France, and the United States. External debts are usually raised by the federal government and any authorized state after federal government's approval. Public debt instruments. The debt stock comprised of treasury bills, treasury certificate, treasury bonds, development bonds, ways and means advances. Treasury bills. Government borrows from the public through the flotation of treasury bills to finance budget deficit. It is a short-term debt instrument that matures within 91 days. It has advantage of rollover, whereby mature treasury bills were liquidated by reissuing new ones. Treasury certification. This is introduced to deepen the domestic money market by raising short-term investment options available. It is a short-term debt instrument where governments borrow. Their maturity period are of two denominations, 1 year and 2 years. Treasury bonds. This was introduced in 1989 to minimize debt service payment rather than provide deficit finance to meet budgetary gap in consonant with the policy of interest rate deregulation in the system. Development stocks. This is floated to raise long-term finance for developmental projects by the federal government. Its maturity period ranges from 5 years to 25 years. The longer the maturity, the bigger the interest rate that is paid. Ways and means advances. This is a special overdraft facilities granted by the central bank at the beginning of the year when the budget is announced to meet the federal government cash flow problems. At the end of the year, all outstanding ways and means advances must be liquidated by the government. Those which cannot be liquidated are converted into treasury bills and certificates. Effect of public debt. Number one, inflationary pressure. When debts are not properly managed, it could lead to inflationary pressure in the economy. For example, if government borrowing is used for war activities, for meeting natural calamities, this could be inflationary in their impact because they are basically consumption oriented. 2. Increased supply of demanded goods. If government borrowing is used for production of capital goods, this will bring about an increase in productivity of the economy, leading to an increased supply of demanded goods, and then inflationary pressure would be checked. 3. External debt repayment constitutes drainage in national resources in favor of foreign countries when the debt is serviced. 4. Public debt has to be serviced, that is, the interest and the principal have to be paid. Therefore, debt financing adds to the future budgetary commitment of the government. Part of future revenue has to go into servicing the debt. 5. External debt payment could result to the slow pace of economic growth and development. The money that could be used for economic projects which can aid economic growth and development is sent abroad for debt repayment. Debt service ratio. The debt service ratio can be calculated as DSR equals principal plus interest over export earnings times 100. DSR means debt service ratio. It is the ratio of debt repayment to export earnings. Principal means initial amount that is borrowed. Interest means amount charged for a loan. Export earnings means revenue earned from export of goods and services. Example, let's assume that the Nigerian government borrowed 15.6424 billion from World Bank in the year 2000, and export earning for the year is 95.422.4 billion. Given that the interest charged on the loan is 9%, calculate the debt service ratio. DSR equals principal plus interest over export earnings times 100. So we have principal, which equals 15,642.4 plus the interest 1,407.8 over 95,442.2, all in billions, times 100. So we have 17,050.2 over 95,442.2 times 100, which gives us 17.86%. The indicator indicates the percentage of export earnings that Nigeria would have to put aside to settle the debt promptly. Summary. In this study session, you have learned that public debt, also known as national debt, is the total debt a country owes its citizens or which is owed to foreign governments or international financial institutions. There are different types of loans, usually raised by the government. These can be classified into short-term and long-term debts. Short-term debts are debts that are mature in less than a year, while long-term has maturity of more than a year. There are also floating debt, which do not have specific maturity dates, while external debt are debt owed to foreigners. Government raises debt in an economy for various reasons, e.g., government may raise debt to finance its budget deficit, to meet a sudden contingency. Public debt have some implications on the economy, especially external debt, if it is not properly managed. It could lead to inflationary pressure in the economy. Its repayment could constitute drainage on the economy, and it could lead to the slow pace of economic growth and development. This is the end of study session 7. Thanks for listening.